Hello my treasures, it's time for Twist to return to Hearthstone with the Caverns of Time, introducing us to a very nostalgic time period of Hearthstone history where there are a bunch of old decks that people still talk about to this day. So to prepare for Twist's return, with the help of Twitch chat, I created 9 nostalgic decks that were things that they either wanted to see or I wanted to revisit, including some of my all-time favorite decks. So let's begin. First deck we're going to go over is Jade Druid. If you aren't familiar with a Jade Druid, it is a deck that works very similar to the Earthen Paladin list that is currently in Standard, where each time you use a card that lists Jade Golem on it, it scales up by 1/1, and then it keeps on going further and further. Along with the cards that did exist back in the day, we also have Cenarian Hold as a new card printed that will allow us to easily combine the Choose One effect of Jade Isle, thus allowing us to scale our golems up even higher than ever before. Essentially, the game plan for this deck is to ramp up like a normal ramp druid, while also having the huge payoff of having additional Jade Golems summon every time you slam down a card that has it in their effect. Now let's get on to the next deck, which is going to be Barnes Hunter. If you've never seen this deck before, you're only running 2 minions in the deck, Barnes and Yogg-Saron. Barnes will drag out Yogg-Saron from your deck, giving you a 1/1 copy, and then the 1/1 copy of Yogg-Saron will drag the other Yogg-Saron out of your deck, so you end up having a 3/4, a 1/1, and 10/10 on turn 5, which not a lot of decks could actually handle back in the day. It's also worth mentioning, I know this is probably not going to be the strongest Hunter list for this Twist format, but I really wanted to do something with the Yogg-Saron, and I had a lot of fun memories with a very similar list in the past. Now let's get on to the next list. For Mage, we are going to be using Yogg-Saron Mage. Now, it wouldn't be this Twist format if I didn't include Yogg-Saron in at least one of our decks. The idea behind this deck is going to be slamming down a bunch of cards that will generate us random spells, so we can slam down the original Yogg in order to either OTK ourselves or our opponents. Now, this is not going to be the strongest deck, but it is a very nostalgic one for a lot of players. And if you're looking for something to do with Yogg-Saron in Twist, this is the perfect deck for you. Now for the next one, which should be no surprise, Secret Paladin. So in Blizzard's infinite wisdom, they decided to buff up Mysterious Challenger to a 5-cost card instead of a 6-cost card. And if you've never seen this card before, it drags 1 copy of each secret from your deck into the battlefield, thus allowing you to drag out 5 secrets for the cost of 5 mana and have a 5/5 on board. This was an insane combo back in the day, and one of the very few cards from the Grand Tournament where there were really only 5 cards playable, and it almost actually killed the game. There also is a little bit of a late game twist where we are using N'Zoth, which may or may not be a little bit too slow, but we'll see in the end. Now let's get on to the next deck, which is going to be Dragon Reno Priest. The idea behind this is we now have a newly printed card for Reno Priest, which is Murzaad, Thief of Time, that has the battle cry: if your deck has no duplicates, discover a dragon, deal damage equal to its cost to all other minions. Now, because this was back in the day where most of the dragons that existed have a high cost, this is probably always going to end up being a AoE board clear, and this is something that we're going to make a use of. Because it wouldn't be a Reno deck without Reno Jackson, we are going to be using him. Essentially, the game plan is to control the board state with a bunch of the really powerful control tools that Priest had back in the day, while also using a bunch of the dragon synergy in order to finish off our opponent with huge big dragons. And if you haven't seen the diamond animation for Murzaad, Thief of Time, go look it up. It's so beautiful, you won't be disappointed. Now let's get on to the next one, which is a deck that I'm very nostalgic for, and a lot of people probably don't even know what the hell this deck is, which is going to be Reno Cthulhu N'Zoth Jade Rogue. I know that's a huge mouthful to say. Now, this isn't a deck that anyone is really nostalgic for, except for myself. This is one of the decks that I homebrewed back in the day that I had a lot of fun with. It basically combines a lot of the themes that were floating around at the time for a bunch of different classes into one style of deck in order to control the board state and then finish off our opponent with a huge Cthulhu that we can easily bounce back through things like Banish or Shadow Step. We also now do have the newly buffed up Anuber Khan that will infinitely revive, and thus making N'Zoth even better than before. Generally, I know this deck is probably not going to be one of the strongest decks in this list, but it is probably one of the most wacky decks that you could possibly play when it comes to this twist format. And speaking of another deck that I'm really nostalgic for, and my favorite deck of all time, Malygos Shaman. Malygos is a card that is my favorite Hearthstone card that has ever existed. He's such a simple card, and he enables so many OTKs, but this was the deck that made me fall in love with the game. The game plan for this is to use the newly buffed up Emperor Thorson in order to discount our hand all by 1, then using Ancestral Call in order to drag out Malygos for 3 mana, and then using a bunch of our really cheap direct damaging spells such as Lightning Bolt, Frost Shock, or even Crackle in order to OTK our opponent, while also using a bunch of AoE board clears to control the board state until we can pull off this combo. This definitely will be the deck that I will be trying out day 1 and probably on the stream of later today. So let's get on to the next deck, which is going to be Discard Warlock. And this deck got a lot of new buffs and new cards within this twist format. Showcall now reads, return all cards you've discarded this game to your hand. They cost health instead of mana, thus giving this deck a huge payoff that it never had before, and something that I really wish we had standard because of all the Discard Warlock support there. Not only did we receive this card, we also did get Chamber of Vicious, which is a location that looks at 3 cards in your hand and you choose 1 to discard and then you draw 2. This is an incredibly powerful card that you're probably just going to always want to slam down on turn 2. Gives you a lot of choice over what card you are going to discard, and because we do have a lot of really good discard targets within this format and a lot of cards that get a lot of benefits such as Malygos Imp, this deck should be incredibly strong. It's essentially a Zoo Warlock list with a little bit of a discard twist. Now let's get onto the final deck, which is probably one of the most iconic Hearthstone decks of all time, Grim Patron Warrior. It wouldn't be a nostalgic format without this deck. This is honestly something that could, in theory, still do pretty well today, even though most of these cards are from classic Hearthstone. The idea behind this deck, if you've never seen it, is to use Grim Patron, which will copy himself whenever he survives taking damage, and also using Warsong Commander that allows you to give charge to all the additional copies of Grim Patron that you do slam down. As Blizzard a few months decided to revert basically every nerf that this deck ever received, and thus allowing this deck to come back in the fold. However, we didn't really have a really good format for it to do so. So these were 9 nostalgic decks, some which are nostalgic for the general community, and some that are just nostalgic for me. Let me know down below which ones you're most looking forward to using, and like always, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, bye bye.